Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is our last meeting. And if you're like me, you have mixed feelings about that. Because, on the one hand, it is satisfying to finish another semester and have another one under your belt, so to speak. But it's also, a little disappointing to say goodbye. And if you're like me, you really love these topics and the entire enterprise of learning and reading and writing and discussing this stuff, you take really, really, really seriously. And so it's sad. It is exciting to take this knowledge and move on and ask new questions. This is Alika's last class ever. Congratulations, Alika. That's really awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. Alika is very excited. I'm positive, and you should be too. But we'll also have to say goodbye, and that means closing the book on this one and turning the page, so to speak. But we had such a good semester, and I learned so much from you. I really enjoy these classes, and even though we've been confined to remote learning, it's been really fulfilling for me and just really exciting. And I take this really, really seriously. So I come to class excited, and if you're like me, you have mixed emotions about saying goodbye, and I understand that. But this is our last meeting. I'm going to say one more thing here. Victoria, this is also Victoria's last class. Congrats. That's pretty awesome. So too is it Justin's last class. Congratulations, everybody. Sure that others too are finishing up. That's really exciting. Good for you. Make sure to celebrate that, revel in it. Really enjoy that because it only comes around once. But I thought that on this last day, we could review for the final exam, which is the 12th from 8 to 11. Let me just, I'm pretty sure I even looked the other day, but I want to just make sure that, oh, it's the 14th, excuse me. Wow. How about that? It's the 14th from 8 to 11 a.m. It is the 14th, Alika. So here's what I'm going to put in there. We're going to review today. I went ahead and shared the study guide that I made in the chat, so please go and track that down. I'm also going to post it on the Cat Courses page as always. The exam will be the same format as last time. It will be posted under files at the beginning of the exam time, and then you'll submit that by the due time at 11 a.m. under assignments. There will be a tab for the final exam. You'll have the full 3 hours, and it's up to you whether you want to use the full 3 hours. Many of you may want to, you may not want to, it's up to you. If you feel ready to go and comfortable submitting it, submit it when you're ready. But the exam itself will be longer than the midterm. Remember that the midterm had 20 multiple choice or true false. What I'm telling you is that the final is going to have somewhere between 25 and 35 true or false or multiple choice. The midterm had 3 short response questions. The final will have somewhere between 4 and 5. So it's going to be a little bit longer. It won't be 3 times longer, and it won't even be twice as long. It'll just be a little bit longer, and you'll have the full 3 hours. However much of that 3 hours you need, you can use. If you finish it early, that's fine too. I'll probably post it a little bit early, as I often do, so that you can have it open and up and going by 8 a.m. Michael's asking, similar to the last midterm, but with extra time. Basically, yes. Not the same number of questions. It will be longer, as I mentioned, but it won't be twice as long, and it won't be 3 times as long. It'll be just a little bit longer. And I've gone ahead and I've shared the study guide with you, and I'm going to post that under cat courses as well. I want you to really look closely at that study guide and prepare very carefully for the exam, because the study guide is your friend. And the best way to go into the exam prepared is by completing the study guide and being ready to write about or respond to any of the topics in your own words. That's the key, in your own words. So this is an opportunity for you to prepare and review the reading and prepare responses and go into the exam with a leg up, so to speak, ready to go. So make sure that you've got that review guide open. And I just want to give you a chance to look at the review guide and just examine the different concepts, examine the topics, examine the readings. As a reminder, you can find the study guide in the chat. And I want to give you a few minutes to just look at this and then generate some questions that you want to ask me or that you want to ask anyone who might be able to answer the question. And I thought a good way for us to review today is for this to be very collegial. I'm happy to be a resource and to answer your questions, but I think you can learn as much from each other as you can me. So in the event that one of us has a question about a concept or a topic, I want you to first open yourself up to input from one of your colleagues. And I think that we can share ideas and hopefully get something stimulating going. And we can be in a good position to get started preparing for the exam, which again, as a reminder, is on the 14th, not the 12th, the 14th. Hey, in my defense, I have 3 classes, the 14th from 8 to 11. So I'm going to give you a chance to look at this, and I'm going to be looking at the chat and watching as some of the questions roll in. Michael's asking, it's not cumulative, correct? No, it's not. Just the material since the midterm. It's all free game. It's all fair game, I should say. The material does build on itself. In that regard, it is kind of cumulative, but it's not an exam that covers all of the material directly. Alike is asking, how long do you want the free responses to be? So remember on the midterm, I said 3 to 5 sentences. I think that's still pretty doable. You know, some students made their responses a little bit longer. That's okay. I think that somewhere between 3 and 5, 3 and 6 sentences is good. There's a real premium placed on being concise and yet being precise. And so one of the skills that we work on is writing concisely and writing persuasively. And often persuasive writing is very, very concise and very limited. And it doesn't ask a lot of the reader. It just sort of is concise. And so these short responses should be ideally pretty short. And that premium will force you to prepare some responses ahead of time. And I want you to think of this in your own words. And so sometimes students ask, well, can I use quotes? Well, in the short responses, quotes might not be very useful because you, above all, just want to demonstrate your understanding. You want to show that you understand the theme or the relationship or the question. And so I want to hear from you. And using someone else's words may not be the best way to demonstrate your understanding. Using your own words, putting it in your own words might be a better way. Now, with that being said, you can always support your point or your words with a brief quote or something small that might support it. But the general point that I want to make is don't put the cart before the horse, so to speak. Make sure the horse is always before the cart. Use quotes and text to support your arguments. Don't use your arguments to support the quotes and the text. Karen says for question 1, what do you mean by party discipline? So remember that when we discussed electoral systems, we addressed proportional electoral systems, and we talked about the different types of proportional electoral systems. In particular, closed party list, open party list, and free party list. We also addressed how these different types affect party discipline. And remember that we understood party discipline as the extent to which members of a party vote together. That's party discipline. Basically like party unity, right? Another form of party unity. But party discipline bears some relation to the particular type of proportional representation electoral system in question. And so this question is asking you not just to talk about, in your own words, what is a proportional representation electoral system. It's also asking you to talk about how the particular type of PR system affects party discipline or the extent to which members vote together. So if that's not ringing a bell, return to the lecture on electoral systems and in particular proportional representation systems. We had a discussion about party discipline. Like it says, the questions on the study guide aren't the ones that will be on the test, just like last time, right? Or like, are you saying that the midterm was similar to the study guide, or that it was not similar? So the midterm review guide, the study guide posed a series of questions, and those questions did bear some resemblance to the questions that were ultimately on the exam. Those questions on the exam were drawn from the study guide. And so even though in some ways the final exam short response questions were a little different, they were drawn from the study guide. And so the final will be very similar. They won't be worded necessarily the same, and I may be recombining some parts of questions in new ways, but theoretically, if you prepare for the exam by completing the study guide, you should be in a position to do well on the exam. It's just that really you can put things together in a variety of different ways. And if you address the whole scope, the whole range of the content on the study guide, you should be prepared to address whatever might come up. And so that's the idea. I'm doing my best here to sort of position you to prepare widely and prepare deeply. Oh, that's okay. Like no worries. Other questions?
I got a question for the topics for review.
Yeah, what's up, Efren?
So I remember like I don't know if I'm gonna answer my own question. So like, are we supposed to only stay for like the topics of review, like what like the question is asking? Because I know that the TA kind of mentioned like on my midterm that like kind of like a brief background on it, and I was like kind of confused on it. So like I don't know if we're supposed to like give kind of a quick like brief background on like either of the questions, or just like solely stick to the question.
What do you mean a background?
Yeah, so for like I'll just use number one as an example. So like if I were to like on the final be like what is a proportional representation electoral system? I remember like the TA not yeah, the TA saying like, oh like I would have preferred if you kind of give like a brief background on like how like it was implemented and all that stuff. Like that's what I was kind of confused.
Well,
Um,
let's be careful. It's unless you can say what question you were referring to, it's not possible for us to say what was really meant. It's possible that one of the questions asked you to begin with what something is so that you can then answer the subsequent part of the question, in which case you would need to begin with what might be thought of as a background. But if it's a question like, how do or in what ways do, that's asking about a relationship between two things. There's not any room or space for a background there, and there's no need for that, and the question's not asking for it. Question one is asking for what I suppose could be thought of as background, because what is a proportional representation electoral system? That's asking you essentially to define it and to demonstrate your understanding of the definition of the concept. That, I guess, is background, but that's part of the question. And in this question, how do a country's electoral institutions determine whether latent demand for distinctive representation actually leads to the creation of political parties? You don't need to begin with a definition of electoral institution. That, I suppose, would be background with respect to this question. But that's what I would have to say to that. But again, I can't really say with certainty, because without you saying what question it is that you're referring to, it's not clear what question it was.
Okay, thank you so much.
Questions? Yes, Jeffrey.
Um, Basically, it wasn't actually a question. I meant to put more as a comment, but I think the question that Ephraim was referring to, like as a background brief, I remember our last midterm one of the questions was about the British Parliament and how basically how was after the Glorious Revolution, how was the Parliament established?
Oh, no.
So I
So,
think
oh, hold on. So the question was, how did the social and economic changes in early modern England affect politics in that country? That was the question.
yeah, and I think that was what Ephraim was referring to as like you need background information to basically to basically give more information of why that the societal and economic status is basically helped that promote parliament to like basically establish a legislator basically
Well, I
like I
mean, I,
think
I, I think I don't know. I don't actually agree. All you need to do to answer that question is say that there's a shift from the country to the towns. Commerce is increasingly done in the towns, and there's a shift from observable assets to hidden assets, and that altered the balance of power in favor of a new economic elite. And as a result, the crown had to now negotiate with that new elite in order to get its wars financed. And as a result, the crown conceded the space and permitted the legislature to have authorization power over spending. I don't actually agree that it requires a lot of background, but that might just be a difference of viewpoint that we have.
thank you.
Other questions? If you don't have questions, we can do something else. I'll give you a few moments though to sort of take a look. So we've got a couple options here. My plan was to review with you, but I'm aware that you're working on papers and that you may not have put a lot of thought into where we are in the class, and I understand. I do want to give you another chance, though, to take a look at that review guide and ask any questions that you might have. I have a plan regarding what we can do to sort of tie together the various threads in the class. And I'll give you a moment to take a look at the review guide one last time before I start this plan that I have for us for finishing up the course. So this is your last chance. Just let me know if you have any questions. Take a look at that study guide, and if not, we can move on and we'll go with what I have planned.
I sent you a topic in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. A question.
Oh yeah, sorry, Victoria. Oh, sorry, I didn't see some of these questions, everybody. My bad. I don't know why the chat didn't tell me. Anyway, okay. Tyler's asking, can you briefly touch on the rule of law once more? Someone help Tyler. What is the rule of law?
From my understanding, the rule of law means that like laws are, like widely known and I guess not accessible, but like understandable by like the vast majority, and they're like equally applied um to the citizens of the state. Um, I don't know, something along those lines. I know that there's more to it, but that's kind of like the two main points um, for my understanding.
Thank you, Jake. So equality is certainly part of it. There's also this sort of role for transparency or visibility of the law and the lawmaking process, right? Absolutely. Haley says the rule of law is the theory that no one is above the law. The law affects citizens and rulers. It helps keep the liberties of the people. Yeah, so we understood the rule of law as really a sort of pattern of rule whereby everyone adheres to the same standard of behavior and everyone is subject to the same law, and that law is equally applied and is created and applied in a transparent and independent way, more generally, right? So that there's accountability, there's equality. There are some other dimensions to the rule of law, but the rule of law is sort of amorphous, right? It's sort of difficult to put our finger on. It's not something that is concrete. It's not something that is a building, so to speak, like a Congress or an executive. Instead, it has more to do with the nature of the relationships in the application of the law, in the patterns that emerge over and across time, and how the law functions as a standard to which all actors adhere or not. Oscar says, for political party oppositions, do we need to refer to the specific examples provided by the videos we watch in class? Oscar, are you asking about question 3? You don't necessarily need to use examples from the videos in class. You can demonstrate your understanding in a variety of ways. You can use examples without a doubt. The videos and some of the examples I showed you are very useful because they help to illustrate many of the lessons. But I can also see a student using some of the hypothetical examples that relate to the scenarios that I put you in, where we reasoned through the incentives in the alternatives in different political circumstances, legislative voting and parliamentary systems, when you belong to the opposition of the government. That is, that's fine. You can use real life examples if you want. You can demonstrate understanding and knowledge in a variety of ways. I could see students writing strong responses using any number of different types of examples or any different types of support for your response. Hey, listen, everybody, I want to go back to that question about the background. I think there might be some confusion there. I think that it's possible that the way that you write a response might imply a need for some background. So for example, when I explained that answering the question, so when I answered the question, how did the social and economic changes in early modern England affect politics in that country? I responded with an analytical narrative that started with the changes in society and the economy and ended with the changes in the political institutions. But in the middle of that narrative, remember that I referred to the shift from observable assets to hidden assets. The observable assets part is the backstory. That's the backstory that Efren and Jeffrey were sort of referring to. That element needs to be in there, right? But it's not necessarily the backstory, so to speak. It's part of the analytical narrative. It's part of the story, so to speak. It's not irrelevant prior historical detail. It's actually part of the explanation. So I think what I was disagreeing with is that it's backstory. Now, it's possible that if you respond to that question by saying, at the start, the assets used to be observable, but then the assets turned into hidden. Well, yeah, it does seem like the observable assets part is a backstory, but my point is a correct response is going to include certain parts of the analytical narrative or certain parts of the relationship or the story or the theme that we studied. And it's going to be part of it. And it's not backstory or unnecessary information. It needs to be part of it. It needs to be sewn in to your explanation. But I think that it's actually a sort of irrelevant small hair we're splitting here. I want to bring it back to the review guide and ask you again what else we can address. What else on this review guide needs clarification? We've now talked about the rule of law. We've talked about government and opposition. Take another moment, and if we don't have questions, I want to show you a video about the state of democratic political institutions globally so that we can consider and size up some of these claims that we've been tossing around about the situation and condition of democracy worldwide. Yes, Lewis, we can. Lewis is asking if we can discuss number 2. He just wants to make sure that he can understand the wording. How do you all understand the wording of this question? How do you understand number 2? What is number 2 asking? Can someone help Lewis?
Well, if I would have to explain question number 2, I would say um, the um, the electoral institution, whether you're talking about first past the post system, or whether you're talking about more of a proportional system, a proportional, more sort of type of electoral institution, whether or not that actually leads to the creation of multiple parties, or whether or not it leads to the creation of political parties. That's how I understand the question.
Can anyone else help Lewis and Jeffrey to sort of clarify or try to better understand the meaning of this question? So number 2 is saying basically this. Look, in all societies, there's this sort of kind of unspoken or like hidden demand for distinctive political parties based on the cleavages that cross-cut or align and that divide people up on the basis of region or language, etc. Now, all societies will sort of request so many parties on the basis of those divisions. But how many parties they actually get depends on the electoral system. Because if it's an electoral system that is majoritarian, the electoral system will act as a brake on the creation of new parties because of the different effects of the electoral system. Specifically, the way that the electoral system shapes the incentives of both voters and politicians. Specifically, the incentives voters have to vote for major parties rather than third parties, and the incentives that politicians have to run with major parties rather than create third parties. And so even though all societies might demand or request sort of naturally a wide number of parties, it's really the electoral institutions that are going to determine whether or not that many parties gets created at the end of the day. And so the distinctiveness of the society is kind of filtered through the electoral institutions. There's society and then there's the institution. The institution sort of is like a net, if you will, a screen. Those electoral systems differ in terms of the type of screen. Majoritarian and proportional systems are very different because they have very different effects or consequences for the translation of distinctive, for the translation of demand for distinctive representation into the creation of parties. Do we have any other questions? You know, I think that I have a question for you, actually. How do you all understand question 3? What is question 3 asking? Any takers?
I would say for, oh, actually, I'll make Jake go first because he raised his hand.
Oh no, you're good, Efren. You go.
So I would say for number 3, like, I would say like how, like, why does a parliamentary system like reward like its own majority instead of like, and like kind of like negatively impact the opposition coalitions, such as like how a majority like coalition actually benefits by staying in power while the opposition like has to like suffer its consequences, something like that.
Can someone help Efren? Someone help Efren. How do we understand number 3? Let's try to clarify this, because this may be an important item for us as a class. How do we understand number 3? What is it asking?
I was gonna say something similar in like within parliamentary systems, what benefit do members of the government have? Like what benefit do they receive from um, kind of going by party lines um, when they're in the government, and what benefits do they get from going with party lines when they're in the opposition?
Okay, good. Good. Efren, can you double back and reiterate your explanation now that you've heard Jake's? Because I think that we're on the same page, but I want to try to use our understanding together to try to refine it a little bit further. So how is your understanding of number 3 after hearing Jake? Efren?
Oh no, yeah, I'm still thinking about it. Sorry, this loud because I'm, yeah, anyway, so I don't know how to, because it's kind of like the same approach that I'm doing, like what Jake kind of answered what I'm doing. So it's like how to like how can one party like benefit like in a majority coalition while the other kind of like has to like,
So let me intervene. So who is the majority? In most cases, most of the time in a parliamentary system? The government or the opposition? Who is the majority, Efren?
can you repeat that question? Sorry,
So an important part of your response was that when it comes to number 3, it has to do with how the groups in the majority have reasons to try to stay the majority. So who is the majority in most of the cases in a parliamentary system? The government or the opposition coalition?
the government.
Correct. Correct. So the government then is, in most cases, the majority, but the opposition would then be, in most cases, the minority, right? But the members of the opposition also have a reason to vote together because they could potentially cause a re-election, right? If they vote together and they're able to defeat the government in a vote on its own bill. Is that correct? Oscar says, so it is in the lines of comparing and contrasting the benefits a political party gets from the majority coalition in comparison when it's part of the opposition. So what I'm saying is this: in a parliamentary system, the parties that belong to the government coalition and the parties that belong to the opposition coalition have very strong incentives to vote together and to not defect. What are those incentives? Why do they have those incentives? Why are they motivated to vote together virtually without fail? What would happen if they didn't? What would the potential cost or fallout be if they did not? Now notice that I didn't say anything about presidential systems, right? So the implicit point is that parliamentary systems are different than presidential systems. And we know that that is true because remember that parliamentary systems involve dependent survival. The prime minister and the legislative majority, their survival depends on each other. Not so in a presidential system, where the president's and the legislature's survival are independent. They're independently elected. And so in a parliamentary system, the parties of the government coalition and the parties of the opposition coalition have very, very, very different incentives than do the parties of the government coalition and the parties of the opposition coalition in a presidential system. So I need you to zero in on those incentives. So when I say reward, and I use that word reward, what I'm really saying is, in what ways do these systems encourage or basically force these different types of parties to behave in these relatively consistent, routine ways? Why are they behaving in this way? So I want you to tell me about that. And this question requires you to be able to analyze and really sort of get into the details and in your analysis of a parliamentary system and how different parliamentary actors, different actors in the parliamentary system have similar incentives because it's a parliamentary system. That is, they have incentives to vote together. Now you need to be able to explain why. Oscar says less polarization to prevent a vote lost of no confidence. So it's not really an issue of polarization. The government and the opposition coalition may be more or less polarized, depending upon the ideological compatibility or ideological spread of parties in the system. Polarization is not really an issue. But Oscar, the second part of your response, and Oscar said to me, having to do with preventing a lost vote of no confidence. Yeah. Now, who has the incentive to prevent a lost vote of no confidence? Whose incentive is that? That's not both of their incentives, right? Who has that incentive? Yeah, that's right, Lewis. That's right, Jake. The government. The government has an incentive to prevent a lost vote of no confidence because in most cases, a lost vote of no confidence would trigger a new election, which they could lose, and they would just like that be swept from power. Now, on the other hand, the opposition coalition has the opposite incentive, right? They have the other incentive. They want to defeat the government. They have every reason to try to vote together and secure the defection of some weakly committed members of the government coalition. They want to defeat the government in a vote on its own bill so that they can then force a re-election and then potentially take power. So this is part of the reason why party discipline is a big, big deal in a parliamentary system. Because life or death hang in the balance. Both are at stake. And so this explains why, for example, in countries like Canada or Australia, it's been like 80 years since the government has lost a vote on its own bill. Because who wants to lose power? The whole point of being in politics is to stay in power or to win power. And so as charitable as we might want to think politicians are, and as much as we might like to think that parliamentary systems are better, the incentives are still basically the same. Politicians want power and they want to stay in power and they want to win power. And that helps to explain mostly everything, right? Just different combinations of that logic. And in the case of number 3, the discipline within both the government and opposition coalitions is really a result of the incentive that the parliamentary system creates for members of those parties to vote together so that they can retain their power, or so that they could potentially win power through a defeat of the government in a vote and a resultant win in a re-election. Listen, everybody, that is the end. We are done with the normally scheduled program for this course, this semester. It's been a hell of a ride. Really enjoyed it a great deal. And I'm gonna miss you all and miss our discussions. As a reminder, the exam is on the 14th from 8 to 11. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and post this review guide. You can reach out to me with questions, but as a reminder, format of the exam will be the same, and you can find it at the beginning of the exam period under files on CAT courses on the 14th at 8, and submitted by 11 under assignments on CAT courses. And that'll be all. Today I do have office hours, but I want to thank you again for a great semester and a really exciting and productive set of conversations. It was great to be a part of it, and I'll miss all of you. Best of luck preparing for the exam. You've done a great job this semester, and I know you'll do well in the exam. I'll see you on the other side. The paper is due this midnight, submitted on CAT courses. I had a great time with you all, and I really appreciate all your kind words. Really loved interacting with you and supporting you. Best of luck. You have my full support, and that'll be all. I'll see you on the other side.